Hello fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and today I want to understand the friendship between Buford and Baljeet. Why was it that this bully and his victim ended up having this complex, engaging, and meaningful bond? Where did this fascinating connection come from? And of course, if you're new here and you'd like to join the Tri-State Area Disney Fan Club, then consider subscribing and supporting me over on Patreon. To understand how a nerd could ever be a friend to his bully, I think it's important to acknowledge that Buford was a tortured child who was described in the past as coming from a broken home. And by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a nerd. I think I would consider myself a nerd. But the way that Buford always describes Baljeet seems to always be in the context of a nerd and bully relationship, so that's what we're gonna call him today. Seriously, go be as nerdy as you want. I mean, right now we're talking about a Disney Channel animated show, so go have as much fun as you want. But back to the big bad bully Buford, he was a layered kid who grew up as a weak and cowardly boy. Only when his pet goldfish was threatened did he ever use his rage to attack someone else. But from that day on, he internalized that to protect what he held dear, he needed to continue to be an intimidating bully. Growing up with a hard family life and few friends, bullying seemed to hide a more caring nature that he was afraid to show to people. He was just a lonely kid who feared that he would be a cat kid all alone, so he seems to hide his emotions to preserve some kind of social standing amongst the other children. Buford bullies other kids, most likely because he can't stand the idea of being ridiculed or embarrassed for having no friends himself, and he just wants some kind of relationship with other people. There's really only a few kids and few instances where he's willing to completely break down, which includes when he loses his pet goldfish. No matter how many times he says he's sweating through his eyes, the truth is he can't stand the fact that he lost his only friend, and is so grateful to everyone who assists him at getting his pet back.
How about a hug? Maybe later.
We also learn on the quest to save his goldfish that no fear of his could ever stop him from saving those he loves, likely because what he fears the most is having no one. That's likely why, as much as Buford would prefer to hide it, he clearly appreciates getting the chance to be happy and have fun with Phineas, Ferb, Isabella, and particularly Baljeet. Now, Baljeet's family moved to America to allow him to be educated in the country. He was a brilliant kid who was obsessed with good grades and internalized that getting an F on a math test was the scariest thing known to man, a feeling I definitely remember from my early elementary school days. Baljeet craved affirmation for his work, but also liked learning musical instruments, practicing as a ventriloquist, memorizing trivia, riding on his unicycle, and obsessing over space adventure. Buford was seen as the stereotypical bully, and Baljeet was seen as the stereotypical nerd, so it was easy for Buford to channel his anger issues and longing for connection into teasing Baljeet for being so smart. Noogies, wedgies, wet willies, and whatever else Buford imagined came Baljeet's way.
You may have my underpants. They just got very messy all of a sudden.
Thanks.
At the start of this kind of friendship, for the most part, the poor kid was defenseless, but that wouldn't last forever. While Baljeet may have begun as an uncertain, struggling, and small boy, his exposure to Buford was going to turn him into someone who could resist forces in his life, which would slowly happen when he was constantly paired with Buford for activities. They shared a tent when they went camping, played together in the F games, and rode a chariot together, just to name a few of their adventures as a team.
You're going down.
But we're on the same team.
But as they continued to spend more time together, Baljeet and his friends began to see a variety of different sides to Buford come forward. The bully began to open up to the bullied. Slowly, Baljeet started to understand Buford's hard past and his fears, and began to see that Buford was not in his life to ruin it. Underneath Buford's bully persona was a gentle person who wanted to float above the ground like a pixie, have his long-lost teddy bear Teddy Boo Boo back, and find love. Buford opened up to Baljeet that in France he read poetry, wept at beauty, clipped his toenails, and used his knowledge of Latin to learn French.
Monsieur, auriez-vous par hasard un soupçon d'huile de cuisine que nous pourrions utiliser sans nous démunir d'un sou?
But of course.
While Buford felt he had to keep up his tough guy act, the truth was that he wanted to be open and vulnerable, and the honesty that Buford and Baljeet had between one another only continued to grow over time. Of course, Baljeet didn't love Buford's outbursts and cruelty, but Baljeet learned to come to an understanding over that behavior, especially since he knew Buford cared about him. Neither Buford or Baljeet wanted the other to suffer, which is why Baljeet saved Buford's life when he was choking. After that, Buford followed the bully code and became a humble servant for Baljeet at a respectable distance, of course. Baljeet was a little master until Buford saved his life, making them even, but that actually didn't stop Buford from watching over Baljeet. Buford actually became very attached to his little nerd.
Can I go?
Well, just be careful, because I worry about you.
I mean, there's even times where Baljeet and Buford spend time together without the rest of the group. They went downtown together, they watched Perry as a duo, and went to Lake Nose. Was their relationship perfect? No, but at the same time, they wanted to be friends. Some experiences were better than others, but they seemed to be willing to brush those moments aside, especially when Baljeet stopped fearing Buford. Even though Buford was a sensitive kid, nonetheless, he put down Baljeet constantly with his words and actions. Over time, though, Baljeet learned to not only see through that bully character that was played up by Buford, but he also discovered an ability to stand up to his complex companion.
Buford is in trouble now. See the sweat upon his brow. Our numbers are superior. Surrender we will not allow.
Baljeet had become willing to fight against his bully with his clone army, go to war against him at the Tri-State Area's annual sci-fi and fantasy convention, was willing to give him a wedgie to show him how much it hurt, and tell him off when he no longer was willing to be his nerd. As Buford became even more extreme with his compulsive need to find Baljeet, he eventually planted a GPS on him to be able to track him, and that in part led to Baljeet leaving Buford. Baljeet also hated that he was using plastic over paper, but for a brief period, Baljeet and Buford both felt free without having their relationship. Baljeet went and climbed a mountain to triumph over the world, and Buford was empowered to use his skills to serve Dr. Doofenshmirtz. But eventually, they couldn't stand being apart. They felt incomplete without one another and almost seemed to validate each other through their complex relationship, so they both decided to return to one another. For Baljeet, there was a bully-sized hole in his heart, and Buford felt there was a nerd-sized hole in his heart, which meant that even though they didn't have a perfect friendship, there was a desire for them to be together. They felt one couldn't exist without the other. Buford couldn't be content without ragging on the person who he confided in, and Baljeet wanted someone to protect him and fight against. And when that's realized, Buford finally expresses just how much Baljeet really means to him.
There comes a time when you don't want to bully everyone. You just want to bully someone you love.
While Baljeet loved complex calculations and Buford hoped to have physical confrontations, they were both involved in a symbiotic relationship where they liked disliking one another. There was an unconventional love there that pushed them both to thrive. They weren't purely friends because there was a lot of conflict between them, but they weren't purely enemies because they did confide in, watch over, and lift up the other. In reality, Buford and Baljeet were frenemies and brothers.
Merry Christmas, old buddy!
After the summer when their relationship began, Buford's bullying persona slowly melted away. That following Christmas, Buford made a wish to Santa to be seen as nice by his friends, and by the time he was going to college, declared that he would go to study film and explore tragedies, likely because he had lived one growing up. Baljeet, on the other hand, graduated early from high school and became a professor at the same time that his friends were transitioning into university life. And I think part of the reason they both got to where they were was because of the other being in their life. Does that mean I think you should go start bullying someone or find a bully? No, I definitely don't think that. Baljeet's timid, frightened, and reserved nature was stripped away in part because he constantly was forced to compete against someone who overwhelmed him physically. He had to be patient with himself and the people around him as he gained confidence. And Buford's emotional barriers were broken down in part because of Baljeet's kindness, compassion, and empathy. He was able to finally be an honest person. They were two boys who were ready to evolve, and a frenemy relationship was what allowed that to happen. All it took was one complex bully to come into that reserved nerd's life to change them both for the better. And what that also created was a long-lasting friendship. But let me know down below what your thoughts are about this unconventional relationship between Buford and Baljeet. Also, make sure to subscribe and click the beautiful bell, and then click on another magical video in the description or on the screen. Finally, thank you to my patrons, thanks for watching, and have a magical day.